At 15:20 hours, on April 7, 1945, Admiral Seiichi Ito stood on the bridge of battleship Yamato watching American aircraft circle at 10,000 feet like vultures waiting for prey to die. For 2 hours, wave after wave of carrier aircraft had been attacking Yamato and her escorts. Torpedoes had struck Yamato's port side repeatedly. The ship was listing 15 degrees to port. Counterflooding had partially corrected the list, but more torpedo hits were inevitable. Water was flooding into compartments faster than pumps could manage. The list was increasing. Speed was decreasing. Yamato was dying. Around Yamato, her escort ships were already dead or dying. The light cruiser Yahagi had capsized and sank at 14:05 hours. 4 destroyers were sunk. 3 more were crippled and would sink within hours. Of the 10 ships that had departed Japan 2 days earlier, only Yamato and 4 destroyers remained afloat, and Yamato would not remain afloat much longer. Ida had known this outcome was inevitable when he received his orders 6 days earlier. Operation 10 Go was not a military operation. It was a suicide mission disguised as a sortie. Yamato would sail to Okinawa with minimal escort and no air cover beach herself on the shore and use her 18.1-inch guns as coastal artillery until destroyed by American forces. The plan was tactically insane and strategically worthless. It would accomplish nothing except the destruction of Japan's last operational battleship and the deaths of 3,000 sailors. Ito had objected. He had been overruled. Now he was dying for a plan he knew was futile. At 15:23 hours, 2 more torpedoes struck Yamato's port side. The impacts were felt throughout the ship. The list increased to 20 degrees. Ito turned to his staff and said, "The battle is lost. All hands abandon ship." But abandoning Yamato was already impossible. The list was too severe. Men could not climb up the sloping decks. Watertight doors that should have been opened were jammed. Escape routes were flooded. Most of Yamato's crew would go down with the ship. Ito would be among them. He retired to his sea cabin to await the end. At 14:23 hours, the list reached 30 degrees. Men were sliding down the deck into the sea. At 14:25 hours, Yamato capsized to port and began sinking. At 14:23 hours, her forward magazines exploded. The explosion was visible from 100 miles away, a fireball that rose 20,000 feet, creating a mushroom cloud that resembled an atomic detonation. Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, the ship that was supposed to ensure Japanese naval supremacy, the super-battleship that mounted 9 18.1-inch guns and displaced 72,000 tons, was gone. She had survived 2 hours under concentrated air attack. She had been struck by at least 11 torpedoes and 6 bombs. She had killed only 10 American aircraft. 3055 of her crew died with her. The age of the battleship had ended. Yamato was conceived in the mid-1930s as Japan's response to an impossible strategic problem. Japan was an island nation dependent on imports for food oil and raw materials. Control of sea lanes was existential. Losing control meant starvation and economic collapse. Japan's primary strategic threat was the United States, a nation with 10 times Japan's industrial capacity and a fleet that could be expanded to overwhelming size if war came. Japan could not match American production. Building 2 battleships for every American battleship was impossible. Japan had to build ships so powerful that quantitative American superiority would be offset by qualitative Japanese superiority. Each Japanese battleship had to be worth 2 or 3 American battleships. This logic led to Yamato. In 1934, Japan announced it would not renew the Washington Naval Treaty, which limited battleship displacement to 35,000 tons and gun caliber to 16 inches. Freed from treaty restrictions, Japan could build battleships larger and more powerful than anything America or Britain could build. The Japanese Naval General Staff issued requirements for a new battleship class. Displacement at least 60,000 tons. Main armament guns larger than 16 inches, preferably 18 inches. Armor sufficient to defeat American 16-inch shells at any range. Speed at least 27 knots. The ship would be invulnerable to any weapon an enemy could bring against it. The design was finalized in 1937. Yamato would displace 65,000 tons, standard 72,000 tons fully loaded. She would be 863 feet long with a beam of 127 feet and a draft of 35 feet. Her main armament would consist of 9 18.1-inch Type 94 guns in 3 triple turrets, 2 forward and 1 aft. Each gun could fire a 200-pound armor-piercing shell to a maximum range of 160 yards over 26 miles. The shells were the heaviest ever fired by any naval gun. The guns themselves were the largest ever mounted on a warship. Secondary armament consisted of 12 6.1-inch guns in 4 triple turrets, 12 5-inch dual-purpose guns in 6 twin mounts, and extensive anti-aircraft armament that would be increased throughout the war. Yamato's armor protection was equally impressive. Her main belt armor was 16.1 inches thick, the thickest ever fitted to a battleship. Her deck armor was 9 inches thick over the magazines and machinery spaces. Turret faces were 25.6 inches thick. The conning tower was protected by 19.7 inches of armor. The armor was specially hardened steel, using Japanese metallurgical techniques that produced steel superior to American armor of equivalent thickness. The armor scheme was designed to defeat 18-inch shells at any range, meaning Yamato could only be penetrated by her own guns. Propulsion consisted of 12 Campon boilers feeding 4 steam turbines generating 150,000 shaft horsepower, driving 4 screws. This produced a maximum speed of 27.5 knots, respectable for a ship of her size but not exceptional. Range was 200 nautical miles at 16 knots. The crew numbered approximately 2,750 men, though this varied throughout the war. Yamato was laid down at Kure Naval Arsenal on November 4, 1937. Construction was conducted in absolute secrecy. The building slip was covered with tarps and camouflage netting to prevent observation from land or air. Workers were sworn to secrecy on penalty of death. No photographs were allowed. Even within the Japanese Navy, knowledge of Yamato's specifications was restricted. American intelligence knew Japan was building large battleships, but significantly underestimated their size, believing they displaced approximately 45,000 tons rather than 72,000. Yamato was launched on August 8, 1940, in a ceremony attended by senior naval officers and government officials. The launch was filmed, but the footage was classified. Fitting out continued through 1941. Yamato was commissioned on December 16, 1941, 9 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor. She was the largest, most powerful battleship in the world. Her sister ship Musashi would be commissioned in August 1942. A third ship, Shinano, was converted to an aircraft carrier during construction and completed in November 1944. A fourth ship was canceled. Yamato's existence was intended to ensure Japanese naval dominance. Instead, she became a symbol of obsolescence. By the time Yamato was commissioned, the era of battleship dominance was already over. Pearl Harbor had demonstrated that aircraft carriers, not battleships, would dominate naval warfare. Japan's own success at Pearl Harbor proved the point. 6 Japanese carriers had crippled the American Pacific Fleet without firing a single battleship gun. Throughout 1942 and 1943, Yamato saw limited action. She served as flagship of the combined fleet for much of 1942, but Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto kept her in rear areas, unwilling to risk the super-battleship in combat. Yamato was too valuable to lose. If she were sunk, the psychological and material loss would be catastrophic. So Yamato remained in port, a fleet in being, while carriers fought the decisive battles. Her first combat action came in June 1944 during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Yamato was part of a surface force supporting Japanese carriers. The battle was a disaster for Japan. American fighters destroyed Japanese carrier aircraft in what American pilots called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Yamato never fired her main battery. She never saw an enemy ship. The battle demonstrated that surface ships without air cover were targets, not threats. Yamato's second action came in October 1944 during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Yamato was part of Admiral Takeo Kurita's Center Force, the same force that engaged Taffy 3 off Samar. On October 24th, while transiting the Sibuyan Sea, Yamato was attacked by American carrier aircraft. Over 5 hours, approximately 260 aircraft attacked Center Force. Yamato was hit by 2 bombs. Both hit the upper deck and caused minimal damage. Yamato's armor was too thick for bombs to penetrate. But Yamato's sister ship Musashi was not as fortunate. Musashi was struck by approximately 17 bombs and 19 torpedoes. She sank on October 24th, becoming the first of the two super battleships to be destroyed. Yamato survived the day, but the lesson was clear. Battleships without air cover could be destroyed by carrier aircraft through sheer weight of attack. On October 25th, during the battle off Samar, Yamato finally fired her main battery in anger. She engaged the escort carriers of Taffy 3 from extreme range. Yamato fired 104 18.1-inch shells at ranges between 25,000 and 35,000 yards. She achieved no confirmed hits on any major ship. Her shells straddled several escort carriers, but the carriers maneuvered successfully to avoid hits. After 2 hours, Admiral Kurita ordered withdrawal. Yamato had participated in the largest naval battle in history and accomplished nothing. Her 18.1-inch guns, the most powerful naval weapons ever built, had fired over 100 rounds and failed to sink a single enemy ship. After Leyte Gulf, Yamato returned to Japan. She was based at Kure Naval Base, increasingly isolated as American forces captured islands across the Pacific. By early 1945, Japan's strategic situation was hopeless. The Philippines were lost. Iwo Jima was under assault. Okinawa would be next. American B-29 bombers were firebombing Japanese cities. The home islands were under blockade. Japan's oil supply was cut off. Yamato had fuel for one final sortie and no prospect of refueling afterward. The Japanese High Command faced a choice. Allow Yamato to remain in port, where she would eventually be destroyed by bombing or capture, or send her on one final mission that would at least die fighting. In late March 1945, planning began for Operation 10-Go, the code name for Yamato's final sortie. The plan was developed by the Naval General Staff in Tokyo over objections from fleet commanders who recognized it as suicide. The plan called for Yamato to sortie from Japan with a minimal escort of 1 light cruiser and 8 destroyers. She would sail south to Okinawa, approximately 350 miles from Japan. She would beach herself on the western shore of Okinawa and use her 18.1-inch guns to bombard American forces. She would continue firing until destroyed. No provision was made for air cover. Japan's remaining aircraft would be conserved for kamikaze attacks. Yamato would sail without fighter protection into waters controlled by American carriers. The plan was presented to Admiral Suemu Toyota, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet. Toyota recognized the plan was suicide but approved it. He later testified that Yamato had to do something. Allowing her to remain in port while the final battle for Japan was being fought would be humiliating. Even if the sortie accomplished nothing militarily, it would demonstrate that the Japanese Navy fought to the end. Admiral Seiichi Ito, who would command the operation, objected strenuously. He argued the plan was futile. Yamato would be destroyed by air attack long before reaching Okinawa. The sacrifice of 3,000 sailors would accomplish nothing. His objections were overruled. Ito was ordered to sortie. He complied, knowing he was leading his men to death. On April 6, 1945, Yamato and 9 escort ships departed Tokuyama anchorage near Kure. The force consisted of Yamato, the light cruiser Yahagi, and 8 destroyers, Isokaze Hamakaze Yukikaze Kasumi, Hatsushimo Asashimo Fuyutsuki, and Suzutsuki. Total complement was approximately 4,000 men. Fuel was minimal. Yamato had approximately 2,500 tons of fuel oil, enough for a one-way trip to Okinawa with a small reserve. No return was planned. This was publicly described as a sortie. It was actually a suicide mission. At 1600 hours on April 6th, the force cleared the Bungo Channel and turned south toward Okinawa. Speed was set at 20 knots. Ito positioned Yamato in the center of the formation with escorts arrayed around her. The destroyers were to screen against submarines and provide anti-aircraft support. No one believed the destroyers could protect Yamato from concentrated air attack. Their presence was symbolic. American submarines spotted the Japanese force within hours. USS Threadfin and USS Hackleback tracked the formation and reported its composition, course, and speed to the U.S. Fifth Fleet. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding Fifth Fleet, ordered Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, commanding Task Force 58, the fast carrier force, to intercept and destroy the Japanese ships. Mitcher had 11 fleet carriers and 6 light carriers available, carrying approximately 1,000 aircraft. He ordered a full strike. At 0600 hours on April 7th, American carriers launched the first wave. Approximately 280 aircraft dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and fighters headed northwest toward the last known position of the Japanese force. At 0822 hours, American scout planes located Yamato approximately 200 miles southwest of Kyushu. The Japanese force was steaming south at 20 knots in formation. The scout aircraft, shadowed from a distance, reporting position and course. Yamato's radar detected the scouts, but could not engage at that range. Ida knew American carrier strikes would arrive within hours. He ordered maximum speed increasing from 20 knots to 24 knots. He could not outrun carrier aircraft, but he could close the distance to Okinawa. Perhaps if Yamato could reach close enough to Okinawa, land-based Japanese fighters would provide some cover. It was a desperate hope. At 1,000 hours, lookouts aboard Yamato spotted aircraft approaching from the southeast. Dozens of aircraft flying in formation at 10,000 feet. Ito ordered air defense stations manned. All anti-aircraft guns were trained skyward. Yamato's anti-aircraft armament had been increased since her commissioning. She now mounted 24 5-inch dual-purpose guns, 162 25mm machine guns, and 4 13.2mm machine guns. The volume of fire was impressive. Whether it would be effective against hundreds of attacking aircraft was another question. At 12:32 hours, the first American aircraft attacked. Dive bombers from USS Bennington and USS Hornet rolled into their attacks from 10,000 feet. Yamato's anti-aircraft guns opened fire. The sky filled with tracer rounds and shell bursts. Several American aircraft were hit and fell burning into the sea. But most pressed their attacks. Bombs fell toward Yamato. Most missed, sending up huge columns of water. 2 bombs hit Yamato's upper deck. One struck near the forward 6.1-inch turret, penetrating the deck and detonating inside. The explosion killed approximately 50 men and started fires. The second bomb hit aft, near the aft 5-inch gun mounts. Damage was moderate. Yamato's thick armor prevented the bombs from penetrating to vital spaces. Bombs were not the primary threat. Torpedoes were. At 12:40 hours, torpedo bombers attacked. Grumman TBF Avengers from multiple carriers approached from different directions simultaneously, forcing Yamato to divide her fire. The torpedo bombers came in low, 50 feet above the water, flying through anti-aircraft fire. Yamato's 25mm machine guns fired frantically. Several aircraft were hit and crashed, but the Avengers pressed their attacks. At 12:41 hours, the first torpedo struck Yamato's port side amidships. The explosion opened a hole approximately 20 feet across. Water flooded into the hull. Damage control parties responded immediately, closing watertight doors and activating pumps. But more torpedoes were coming. At 12:42 hours, a second torpedo struck port side forward. At 12:43 hours, a third torpedo struck port side aft. Yamato began listing to port. The damage control officer reported to the bridge that 3 torpedo hits had flooded multiple compartments on the port side. The list was 5 degrees and increasing. He recommended counter-flooding compartments on the starboard side to correct the list. Counter-flooding was standard damage control procedure. By deliberately flooding compartments on the opposite side, the list could be reduced. But counter-flooding had a cost. It increased the weight of water in the ship, reduced freeboard, and decreased stability. If more torpedoes struck the flooded side, the ship would capsize. The damage control officer understood this. Ito understood this. There was no choice. Without counterflooding, Yamato would capsize from the existing damage. Ito ordered counterflooding. Valves were opened on the starboard side. Seawater flooded into compartments deliberately. The list decreased to 2 degrees. But Yamato was now heavier, sitting lower in the water, slower and more vulnerable. At 1300 hours, the first American strike departed. Yamato had survived the initial attack. Damage was significant but manageable. She was still making 20 knots, still fighting, still heading toward Okinawa. Ito assessed the situation. Yamato had been hit by 3 torpedoes and 2 bombs. She was listing slightly flooding in multiple compartments, but still operational. The escorts had also been hit. The destroyer Hamikaze was sinking. The cruiser Yahagi was on fire and listing, but the force was still intact. Perhaps they could reach Okinawa. Perhaps the mission could be accomplished. At 13:20 hours, lookouts spotted more aircraft approaching. The second strike, approximately 100 aircraft, was arriving. This attack would be decisive. The second strike focused on Yamato. The escorts were secondary targets. The American strike coordinator had observed the results of the first attack. Yamato was listing to port. That meant the port side was already damaged. More torpedoes on the port side would increase flooding and capsize the ship. The strike coordinator ordered all torpedo bombers to attack the port side. At 13:22 hours, torpedo bombers attacked from the port beam. Yamato turned hard to starboard to present her stern to the torpedoes, minimizing target area. The maneuver was partially successful. Several torpedoes missed, but at 13:23 hours, a torpedo struck the port side amidships. At 13:35 hours, another struck port side forward. At 13:42 hours, another struck port side aft near the rudder. The accumulation of damage was overwhelming. 5 torpedoes had now struck the port side. Flooding was catastrophic. The list increased to 15 degrees despite counter-flooding. Speed decreased to 12 knots as flooding reached the engine rooms. Ito received reports from throughout the ship. Multiple compartments flooded, pumps overwhelmed, fires spreading, casualties mounting. At 1400 hours, Ito realized Yamato could not be saved. He ordered the crew to prepare to abandon ship. But at 1402 hours before the order could be executed, more aircraft attacked. At 1405 hours, the light cruiser Yahagi capsized and sank, taking most of her crew with her. At 1410 hours, 3 more torpedoes struck Yamato's port side in rapid succession. The impacts were felt throughout the ship. The list increased to 20 degrees. Men could no longer stand on deck without holding on to something. Equipment broke loose and slid down the sloping deck into the sea. At 1417 hours, the list reached 25 degrees. Yamato's captain, Rear Admiral Kosaku Ariga, ordered all hands to abandon ship. Ito had already retired to his cabin to die with the ship. Ariga remained on the bridge. Most of Yamato's crew could not abandon ship. The list was too severe. Watertight doors were jammed. Passageways were flooded. Men trapped below decks had no escape. Those on deck faced a different problem. Yamato was still making 7 knots. Jumping from a ship moving at 7 knots into water filled with oil and debris was often fatal. Many men hesitated. The decision was made for them. At 1420 hours, 2 more torpedoes struck port side. The list increased to 30 degrees. Yamato was capsizing. At 1423 hours, Yamato rolled completely onto her port side. Her superstructure smashed into the water. Men on deck were thrown into the sea. Men below deck were trapped as the ship inverted. Yamato hung suspended for several seconds. Her starboard hull exposed, her propellers still turning slowly. Then she began to sink. As she sank, the water pressure increased inside her hull. Watertight compartments that had held began to fail. Air trapped inside the ship compressed. At 1423 hours, approximately 30 seconds after capsizing, Yamato's forward magazines exploded. The explosion was catastrophic. Hundreds of tons of propellant and explosives detonated simultaneously. The blast tore Yamato apart. Her bow section separated from the hull. The explosion sent a fireball thousands of feet into the air. The shockwave was felt on American ships 40 miles away. The mushroom cloud rose to 20,000 feet and was visible from Kyushu 100 miles away. When the smoke cleared, Yamato was gone. Debris covered several square miles of ocean. Oil slicks spread across the water. Hundreds of men were swimming, trying to stay afloat. The destroyers Fuyutsuki and Yukikaze, still operational, began rescuing survivors. They pulled 280 men from Yamato's crew out of the water. 3045 men died with the ship, including Admiral Ito and Captain Ariga. Of Yamato's crew of 332, only 276 survived. The percentage of survivors was 8%. Of the 10 ships that sortied from Japan, 4 returned: the destroyers Fuyutsuki, Yukikaze, Hatsushimo, and Suzutsuki. Yahagi and 4 destroyers were sunk. Approximately 3,700 Japanese sailors died during Operation Tengo. They had accomplished nothing. American losses were minimal. 10 aircraft were shot down by Japanese anti-aircraft fire. 12 airmen were killed. 4 were rescued. The loss ratio was absurd. Japan lost a battleship, a cruiser, 4 destroyers, and 3,700 men. America lost 10 aircraft and 12 men. The tactical mismatch was so complete that the battle was less a fight than an execution. Yamato had no chance. She never had a chance. The mission was suicide from the beginning. American carrier aircraft had proven they could sink any ship that lacked air cover. Yamato was just the largest example. The technical analysis of Yamato's sinking reveals the effectiveness of coordinated air attack. Yamato was struck by at least 11 torpedoes and 6 bombs. Post-war analysis suggests possibly 13 torpedoes, but the exact number is uncertain because the ship exploded and sank. The torpedoes were Mark 13 aerial torpedoes carrying 600-pound Torpex warheads. Each torpedo could blast a 20-foot hole in a ship's hull. 11 holes meant Yamato was flooded with approximately 40,000 tons of seawater by the time she capsized. Her displacement was 72,000 tons. Adding 40,000 tons of water meant her effective displacement was 112,000 tons. No ship can remain afloat with that much flooding. The bombs were 1,000-pound and 500-pound general-purpose bombs. They could not penetrate Yamato's armor belt or deck armor. They hit superstructure gun mounts and deck areas where armor was thinner. The bombs caused fires, killed crew, and destroyed anti-aircraft guns, but they did not directly contribute to sinking. The torpedoes sank Yamato. The coordinated torpedo attack on the port side was tactically brilliant. By concentrating all torpedoes on one side, American aircraft ensured that flooding would be asymmetric. Yamato's counterflooding could not keep pace with the accumulating damage. The list increased inexorably until capsizing was inevitable. The psychological analysis reveals Operation Ten-Go was about honor, not strategy. Japanese military culture placed enormous emphasis on dying with honor rather than surrendering or being captured. Yamato remaining in port while Japan fought its final battle would be dishonorable. Yamato had to sortie, had to fight, had to die. The death itself was the purpose. Whether the death accomplished anything militarily was secondary. This mentality was incomprehensible to American commanders analyzing the operation afterward. Admiral Spruance called Operation Ten-Go stupid. Admiral Nimitz said it was a waste of ships and lives. Both were correct from a Western rational military perspective. From a Japanese perspective centered on honor and symbolic gesture, Operation Ten-Go made sense. Yamato died fighting. That was sufficient. The strategic analysis reveals that battleships had become obsolete by 1945. Yamato was the ultimate expression of battleship design. She was the largest, most heavily armed, most heavily armored battleship ever built. If any battleship could survive concentrated air attack, it should have been Yamato. She could not. She lasted 2 hours. She was struck by 11 torpedoes and sank. If Yamato could not survive, no battleship could survive. The era of battleship dominance was over. Aircraft carriers were the new capital ships. The lesson had been taught repeatedly throughout the Pacific War at Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, Midway, Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf. Yamato's destruction was the final exclamation point. The human cost of Operation Ten-Go was severe and pointless. 3,700 Japanese sailors died accomplishing nothing. Their deaths did not delay the American advance. They did not damage American forces. They did not defend Japan. They were thrown away on a mission designed to fail. The survivors carried the trauma for the rest of their lives. Yoshida Mitsuru, a junior officer aboard Yamato who survived, wrote a memoir titled Requiem for Battleship Yamato. He described the operation as murder. Senior officers had ordered junior officers and enlisted men to die for symbolic purposes. The survivors felt guilt for surviving when so many died. They felt anger at the officers who ordered the mission. They felt betrayal by a military command that valued symbolism over lives. The wreck of Yamato was located in 1985 by Japanese researchers. She lies in approximately 1,120 feet of water, 180 miles southwest of Kyushu. The wreck is in multiple sections. The bow section is separated from the main hull due to the magazine explosion. The hull is inverted, lying upside down on the seafloor. Video footage from submersibles showed the massive scale of the wreck. The hull is enormous, dwarfing the submersibles. The armor plate is still intact, massive sections of steel that protected nothing in the end. The 18.1-inch gun barrels are visible, blown off their turrets by the magazine explosion. They lie scattered across the seafloor, the most powerful naval guns ever built, fired in anger once accomplished nothing, now silent in 120 feet of water. The legacy of Yamato is complex. In Japan, she is remembered as a symbol of Japanese industrial achievement and military sacrifice. The Yamato Museum in Kure displays a 1/10 scale model of the ship. The museum attracts hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. Many Japanese view Yamato as a tragic symbol of a doomed war, fought with honor despite impossible odds. In the West, Yamato is remembered as the ultimate example of obsolescence. She was the largest, most powerful battleship ever built. She achieved nothing. Her 18.1-inch guns fired 104 rounds in combat and sank nothing. She was destroyed in 2 hours by aircraft costing a fraction of her construction cost. She represents the failure to recognize when technology has made a weapon system obsolete. The design choices that created Yamato 18.1-inch guns, 16-inch armor, 72,000-ton displacement, were optimized for surface combat against other battleships. That combat never came. Yamato never fought another battleship. She fought aircraft. Her guns were useless against aircraft. Her armor was irrelevant against torpedoes. Her size made her an enormous target. Everything that made her powerful in surface combat made her vulnerable to air attack. The lesson is that weapon systems must be designed for the wars they will actually fight, not the wars planners want to fight. Japanese planners wanted decisive battleship engagements, like Tsushima in 1905. They designed Yamato for that war. That war never happened. Yamato fought a war of carrier aircraft and submarines. She was designed for the wrong war. The comparison with Iowa-class battleships is instructive. American Iowa-class battleships displaced 57,000 tons, 15,000 tons less than Yamato. They mounted 9 16-inch guns, smaller than Yamato's 18.1-inch guns. They had thinner armor. But Iowa-class battleships survived the war and remained in service for decades afterward. They were used for shore bombardment in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and the Gulf War. They survived because they were designed as fast battleships optimized for integration with carrier task forces. They had sufficient speed to keep up with carriers. They had heavy anti-aircraft armament. They were intended to protect carriers and bombard shore targets, not fight other battleships. That design philosophy was correct for the war that was actually fought. Yamato was designed to fight other battleships in single decisive engagements. That war never came. When war came, it was carriers fighting carriers, submarines attacking merchant shipping, and amphibious assaults on islands. Yamato was irrelevant to all of those. She was too valuable to risk, so she stayed in port. When she finally sortied, she was sent on a suicide mission because there was nothing else to do with her. The super-battleship that was supposed to ensure Japanese naval dominance was a white elephant. She consumed enormous resources in construction. She consumed fuel that Japan could not spare. She accomplished nothing except dying dramatically. The final judgment on Yamato is that she was a beautiful, impressive, magnificently engineered failure. She was the largest battleship ever built. Her 18.1-inch guns were the most powerful naval weapons ever mounted on a warship. Her armor was the thickest ever fitted to a battleship. She represented the pinnacle of battleship design, and she was obsolete before she was commissioned. The world had moved on. Aircraft carriers had replaced battleships as the dominant naval weapon. Yamato was built for a war that no longer existed. When she finally fought, she was sent on a suicide mission because there was no other purpose for her. She sailed to Okinawa with minimal fuel, no air cover, and orders to beach herself and die. She never reached Okinawa. American carrier aircraft found her 200 miles from Okinawa and destroyed her in 2 hours. She was struck by at least 11 torpedoes and 6 bombs. She capsized and exploded. 55 men died with her. The largest battleship ever built sent to die, destroyed by aircraft, proving that even the mightiest battleship was obsolete in the age of air power. Yamato laid down November 4, 1937, commissioned December 16, 1941, sunk April 7, 1945. Service life 3 years, 4 months. Combat record participated in 3 major battles, fired main battery, once sank 0 enemy ships. Final mission suicide sortie to Okinawa Operation 10 Go, destroyed by carrier aircraft to 100 miles from objective. She was the Super-Battleship. She was sent to die. She proved that the age of battleships had ended. The largest battleship ever built became the final demonstration that size, armor, and firepower were irrelevant against coordinated air attack. The suicide mission of the Super-Battleship. The day Yamato died, the battleship era died with her.